Well, good morning, y'all, and it is good to be here with you, and it is a topic that I'm really passionate about. Last year, I did a presentation. Well, actually, the last 2 years, I was at Denton Bible too, and I did kind of presentations on the terrorist threat to churches. And as we started really looking at the stats, though, actually, there's an organization that was here 2 years ago at Denton called Concilium. And I'm actually on the board of Concilium. They do a lot of training for missionaries and aid groups. But also they have a neat product that they put out through their Concilium Inform that they look at basically attacks and incidents directed at churches. And they have a pretty cool newsletter that they put out monthly that kind of looks at those topics. But they also did a study that has looked at attacks against churches or violent events at churches over the last 3 years. So going from 19 to 22. And in those, they tracked 73 events. And out of those 73 events, there's only one of them involved terrorism. 2 of them involved hate crimes or those sorts of things. So that's really 3 out of the 73 that were really involved in those sorts of topics. Everything else was pretty much either crime, mentally unstable individuals, and other threat actors. So as I was thinking about this last year and talking with Chuck, I thought it would be good to kind of talk about protective intelligence and ways that churches can employ protective intelligence to become proactive and as looking for threats instead of just reactive, because a lot of what we do as security people is react to these threats or incidents, but it's always much better to be proactive than reactive. Let me see, is that going to work? Wait, there it is. Okay. So in this section, this first hour, I'm going to look at what is protective intelligence, why do we or should we use protective intelligence, why does it work, why is it effective, and then who can use protective intelligence tools. So I guess as we get into this, protective intelligence is a collection of processes that are designed to forecast, identify, and assess threats so that security measures can be implemented to avoid, deter, or at the very least mitigate those threats. And I want to, it's something that really works, and something that I've been involved with really for over 30 years now. Both in the government sector and in the private sector. And I can tell you it works. And it doesn't matter what size organization you're dealing with or what size your security team is. These measures and these concepts can really help you become proactive. When I was with the government, I was with the Diplomatic Security Service. And in 1989, I had transferred over to DS's, what then was the Counterterrorism Investigations Branch. And in ICT, we would basically investigate threats against the Secretary of State. We would investigate threats against visiting foreign dignitaries. And that could be everybody from the Coptic Pope to Princess Diana to Yasser Arafat. I mean, or just, there's just a wide variety of people that we would protect. Basically, anybody under head of state that was significant, we would protect. And then we would look at threats to embassies, ambassadors, and diplomats abroad. So we had a pretty big purview. But a lot of what we were doing was responding. We were going out and we were investigating that smoking hole in the ground that used to be an embassy. And as we started looking and investigating the attacks, we started trying to think and come up with ways that we could not just respond to them, but prevent them and kind of get ahead of the curve instead of just responding to that. So what we started doing in those operations and in those investigations, we started looking at kind of the pre-incident indicators, things that could have been picked up on beforehand that could help us, find out that something was coming down. And by focusing on those, so really that helped us identify those threats, assess those threats. That then allowed us to put measures in place to set them off. And almost any incident that we're looking at that's a planned incident against any target here in the U.S. even, not just the overseas stuff. There are always these indicators, and whether that's a leakage indicator, whether that's a surveillance indicator, target or weapons acquisition indicator, or even out-and-out threats. There's a lot of incidents that we see where there are out-and-out threats, and that also applies to in the church scenario. When you look at, and that's, I'm going with the planned attacks as opposed to something that happens spontaneously, just a fight or something that happens spontaneously. But planned violence, intentional violence, is part of the cycle. And there are things that we can see to kind of forecast those attacks. So why use protective intelligence? Because action is always faster than reaction. Without protective intelligence component, you're really operating in the blind. Do you guys remember when you used to play the hand slapping game when you were kids? Right? The action was always faster than reaction. Now you could try to go, and sometimes you'd anticipate the person about to slap you, but that's also action. That's not reaction. And if you look at some of the studies that have been conducted by people like the Force Sciences Institute, are you guys aware with them? All the work that they do, they have actually proved scientifically, involving trained officers with some of these tests, that this action is always faster than reaction. Now, sometimes you can luck out, and the person that initiates the action first is maybe inept, or they make a mistake, they miss. But there's really no way that you can put that bullet back in the gun once it comes out. Once that knife is out, it's hard to stop that swing. Speaking of which, I don't know if you guys saw the Salman Rushdie thing yesterday at Chautauqua. That was kind of I guess shocking to me for a couple of reasons. First of all, when I was a kid, I'm from Pennsylvania, and actually I grew up in Erie, Pennsylvania. And I used to spend a lot of my summers at Chautauqua with various events there, I would say, even in that very auditorium where he was attacked. And it's shocking to me that a guy that was dressed like that, with that profile, did not stick out in the crowd in Chautauqua. But also it shocked me because I had actually protected Salman Rushdie on some of his first visits back to the U.S. right after the Iranians had made that threat on his life. And the way that we protected Salman Rushdie was by using protective intelligence and a low-profile detail. So anyways, when we were at Diplomatic Security, we started putting these things together. We started looking at these indicators. And we found out that many times, rather than just putting a big, heavy detail on someone, it was actually better to have a lighter detail, but to be more outward looking and to really be focused on potential attackers and to really be focused outside of kind of the perimeter instead of being just on a diamond around the protectee, kind of more inwardly focused. So what we would do is kind of run these, what we call protective intelligence counter-surveillance teams around a small protective team. So when Rushdie came in, we actually had a driver, we had an agent in charge. In the front, we had one car. We had no follow car, but the idea was to be low key. We didn't want to draw attention to him. And so what we did is just had a very low key detail, and then we had a bubble around the detail of agents that were looking for surveillance, because we knew that any intentional attack against him was going to involve surveillance first. And so we put these principles into place. We did the same thing with a Colombian judge that we had under our protection. Basically, she had the fortitude to sign an arrest warrant against Pablo Escobar. And Escobar promptly put a $5 million price on her head for anybody that would kill her. And of course, the Colombians are like, well, we can't keep, they couldn't even keep their own presidential candidate safe, right, down there. So they made her a diplomat and shipped her up to the Organization of American States mission in DC. And they said, okay, Americans, you wanted Escobar, now you protect this lady. There again, we were very uptight about this detail because, especially at that time in the early 90s, DC was murder central. You had a lot of street gangs who were, very heavily involved in the crack trade, and it would have been very easy for Escobar to pay them off in cocaine in order to take this judge out. So we were pretty ramped up about that. But we believed enough in these principles of protective intelligence that we did the same thing. We didn't run a big detail with a heavy counter-assault team, big follow car. What we did is we just went very low-key. We weren't going to attract attention. We had a driver, an agent in charge, and then we had that bubble around them, watching for problems to evolve. So rather than having a team operating in the blind, we were going outside and working and watching things around the target, watching for those signs that would develop. And we also then started deploying that to some of our embassies abroad for the same reason. And actually, because of that, really since the 80s, we've had a lot less attacks against our facilities overseas. We've been able to thwart a whole bunch of those attacks just by looking for the surveillance as it was progressing. Now, obviously it's a different situation when you're in a location like Benghazi where it's Indian territory. There's not a lot that you can do. Or you have someplace like Tunisia where you have this, huge mob of people. There's not a lot you can do. I mean, you can see them coming, but there's not a lot you can do to really protect your facility against that kind of a mob. But still, the protective intelligence at least lets you know that things are brewing, that problems are coming, and allows you to be proactive instead of just reactive. Okay, so that's the why, and that's the big, and what I'm trying to get through, and hopefully that you'll take away from this, is that that's what allows us then to get to that proactive side of the equation, or left of the boom, as a lot of you guys in the military law enforcement have heard over the years. Now, why does it work? Because attacks don't happen out of a vacuum. And that's one of the things that we learned over the years when we were investigating attacks, whether it was a rocket attack, whether it was an assassination attack, whether it was a bombing attack, vehicular assaults. These things just don't happen. They're the result of a deliberate process. And those processes can be observed and they can be detected, but only if you're looking for them. And that was basically the problem that we had run into on the government side, is that people weren't looking for them. Okay, so this is the attack cycle. Now, a lot of people initially, and we had kind of, when we were working with it initially, we would call it the terrorist attack cycle. But as I've thought about it over the years, and as we've looked at it, it's really applicable to almost any planned crime. And almost any criminal is going to use some form of this process. Now, obviously, the surveillance that somebody that's going to, maybe steal a purse snatcher, is going to be shorter than somebody that's looking at a kidnapping or an attack, right? But they're still going to do that casing. I had a good war story about that. We were working a protective detail in New York City, out of the Four Seasons Hotel on 42nd Street there. And we were working with this low-key concept, this protective intelligence concept. And our protectee walked out of the Four Seasons and was going down the street to head to a cafe to meet a friend for some coffee. Now, of course, on her wrist, she had a tennis bracelet that's probably worth more than my house. But she's on the phone. She was kind of oblivious to what was going on around her. But my partner and I kind of, picked up the envelope around her, and we saw a guy who had been staking out the four, because what is at the Four Seasons, right? High value targets. People with a lot of money and a lot of stuff. So we picked up on this guy that picked up on her when she came out. He saw that she wasn't paying good situational awareness. She wasn't paying attention to what was going on around her. And we saw his eyes kind of focus on that tennis bracelet. I was like, oh man, that's a big money item. So she starts walking. We notice him then start to follow in behind her. And so my partner kind of breaks cover a little bit, catches the dude's eye, and he just goes, and he's like, and then he, broke off and took off. But, he was planning, he had done his surveillance, right? He was planning then how he was going to launch that attack. So he was going through this attack cycle, even though it was just at a micro level. Of course, at the same time, if you've got a kidnapping, you may end up doing months or weeks of surveillance in order to try to get the patterns of the target. There have been a couple really good books written recently on kidnappings by a guy by the name of Philip Jett, and he did one on the Coors kidnapping, and he also did one on the Riso kidnapping, who was the CEO of Exxon. And one of the things that I really appreciated about Philip's books is that in both cases, he really focused on the attack cycle and the pre-operational surveillance that was conducted before both of those attacks. One of the things that was crazy is in the Riso case, he had actually received training on situational awareness, on attack recognition, seeing surveillance, but he didn't think he needed to do those things in New Jersey. He had been other places with Exxon in the Middle East. He had been in, I believe, Colombia, some other places, Venezuela maybe. And he had practiced those things overseas. But then when he got to New Jersey, he flipped the switch and wasn't paying attention. And so he missed all of the pre-operational surveillance that was being conducted in this attack cycle. But one of the things that you see on our graphic here, the surveillance that happens during this attack cycle is really, really pervasive, and it happens at multiple places, right? The target identification phase, that's really trying to figure out what type of target, or maybe narrow down a few targets that they're looking at maybe hitting. A good example of this one, I think, recently with the target identification and selection, when it regards churches, there was an Al-Qaeda, actually it wasn't Al-Qaeda, it was Islamic State, it was an Islamic State supporter in Pittsburgh. He was a Syrian who had actually almost, like hitting the lottery, and his family had been able to come over to the US to be resettled. But he got caught up in all the Islamic State propaganda, and he decided that he was going to get his jihad on here in the US, and he wanted to attack a target. Initially, because he's Syrian, he was looking at hitting a Shia mosque in Pittsburgh. There's a lot of sectarian tensions between the Sunnis and the Shias, and they consider the Shias not to be real Muslims. And so, he was going to attack the Shia mosque. And the cool thing about that case, by the way, fortunately, as he was going through this radicalization process, he decided or realized he needed help. And so he reached out to somebody online and he ended up hooking up with an FBI informant. So we saw this entire attack cycle as he was rolling through it, which is, thank goodness for dumb criminals, right? But as he was going through his target selection, he looked at the mosque and he decided that it was too hard for him to attack because they had good locks and they locked the doors during their services and they had CCTV outside. And so he just decided that was too hard for him to attack based on his capabilities. And so what he did then is selected a Nigerian church that was meeting. It didn't have the security at all. He saw it as a much softer target. So he actually went from a mosque to a church, but it was because of the target profile and that it was easier for him to attack. So that was kind of how that attack cycle manifested itself in that case. Planning and preparation. Okay, so once you figure out, okay, I'm going to attack this place. Then they go to the idea of trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to attack? What kind of weapons am I going to use? What time? What date? What is the best approach to attack this target? Sometimes in the planning and preparation, you will see them go and maybe do some tactical training. We saw that with the assassination of Meyer Kahane by the group in New York, actually that ended up doing the first Trade Center bombing. And basically Meyer Kahane was the guy that started the Jewish Defense League, which was basically a Jewish terrorist organization that was started in the US. But he was assassinated by a Muslim extremist, an Egyptian by the name of El Sayed Nusayr. But what they did prior to that attack was tactical training. So they would come over into the Poconos, do some tactical training at a range, work on their marksmanship, and sure enough, that's how Nusayr killed Kahane. He walked in with a revolver, .357 revolver, put a couple rounds in him at fairly close range. But they had that preparation and planning. So they had gone through this whole thing. They had done their surveillance. And in that case, it's interesting because one of his confederates in that case, Ibrahim El-Gabroni, was a cab driver. And so we believe that they did a lot of the surveillance for that attack using the cab as cover, which in New York City, that's a pretty darn good cover, right? There's cabs everywhere. And it's hard to kind of distinguish one from. Of course, NYPD has some pretty cool cabs that they use for surveillance too. It's a nice vehicle. But anyway, so you have that planning and preparation phase. So there they became, okay, how should we deploy? What weapons should we use? Where should we do it? When should we do it? If it's a mobile target, are we going to select our attack site for it? Or in our context with a lot of our churches, where are we going to hit the church and when? Is there an outreach? And that's how that would go with the planning and preparation. Then you have kind of as a subunit of that, but also as weapons acquisition. And that's where we've seen a lot of thwarted cases in the US when it comes to extremism, has been in that weapons acquisitions phase. That's when they're trying to obtain a bomb. A lot of these guys, and thank heavens they're like this, but a lot of these guys are out there trying to get automatic weapons. For some reason, they think that they need fully automatic weapons to do an attack, and they can't do it with semi-auto, that they could just legally buy. So there's been a lot of these guys that have actually stumbled into sting operations trying to get bombs or fully automatic weapons, which has been very fortunate. But weapons acquisition phase is another phase where they can be detected. And then, of course, deployment. That's when they're actually going out to get ready at that attack site. Then you have the attack, the escape, suicide, or survive, depending on what they want to do there. Exploitation, and of course that can depend, or really sometimes even exploitation in some of the attacks we've seen. I think of the shooting that we had in South Carolina at the church, where that shooter decided to survive so that he could use the trial for propaganda purposes. We also saw that in Norway with the Norway bomber and shooter, where rather than crashing and burning and dying or committing suicide, he wanted to use the trial as a place where he could grandstand and kind of share his ideology and use that for more propaganda. So that's troubling on the exploitation. But really one of the things I want to focus on is the surveillance there. Because the surveillance is where they are the most vulnerable during this whole process. One of the things that people don't understand is that surveillance is hard. And it's an unnatural behavior. It's one of these things like, they have a thing called the burn syndrome that you feel when you're doing surveillance. And I don't know, how many of you guys are like law enforcement or PIs that have ever done much surveillance? And they don't even, most courses that really don't even prepare us very well. I did a lot of that when I was at FLETC, the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. We do like a block on surveillance. But it really didn't prepare us all that well. The course that helped me the most was one I took with the CIA on the surveillance techniques. And that was much more intensive. It was a couple weeks, a lot of practical exercises, a lot of street time. But they teach you how to do it, and most threat actors don't receive that kind of training at all. And consequently, most of them are very bad at surveillance. Most criminals are bad at surveillance. The problem is that nobody's looking for them, and so they get away with it. And so I'm going to talk a little bit in the second hour about kind of some tools you can use, even at a church level, to look for surveillance and to be able to actually manipulate surveillance. Actually, I wrote a piece that just came out on our website yesterday called "Messing with Their Heads," where I kind of outline tactics that individuals can use to smoke out surveillance, but also security teams can use. But I'll talk a little bit about some of that stuff in the second hour. But anyway, suffice it to say, surveillance is a really critical area, and it's something that as a security team, it's something that you really need to be looking for. And it's something that will happen if there's going to be a planned attack against your church. Another concept that we find that's very important, and this can either pertain to insider threats, and yeah, we do have insider threats at churches, don't we? The aggrieved spouse, the aggrieved staff member. Perhaps it's somebody that's involved in ministry that's upset, or somebody that's receiving services through a benevolence ministry, who has had access. They understand our security. They've been inside our facility. And so those insider threats. But also, this pathway to violence also pertains to aggrieved individuals who are outside outside of our organizations. So, when I was with the State Department, we would get threat letters all the time against the Secretary of State. Just people that were upset at U.S. policy on something, or we had a guy who thought that Secretary of State Schultz was controlling his brain with a satellite. And he was mad about it. And he was, threatening to kill the Secretary of State because of that. So, sometimes it's the outside people. And in a church service or a church context too, we've seen cases with aggrieved individuals. They're again related to benevolence ministries. You guys had the shooting here in that wasn't Southern Springs. What was the one just recently with the guy who had been receiving? White settlement. Yeah, white settlement. Yeah, so that's another example of where you have somebody that had that grievance, and people within the church knew that he was aggrieved. And so, even in that context, and that's where this pathway to violence model is really very useful. It's where you have kind of contact or communication with the individual so that you can kind of track their progress, through that pathway to violence. So you're going to start out with that grievance, and generally it's going to be expressed verbally, in writing. It could be on social media, and more we're seeing that with our corporate clients. We're doing a lot of social media monitoring for them right now, because we're starting to see these people who are fixated and aggrieved, who are just posting this stuff on social media. And that might be something for you within your church, especially at a bigger church, but any church where you have awareness. But still, if you have a social media team or a media team, make sure that you're working with them as a security team so that they know to communicate those sorts of individuals or those sorts of threats to you, so that they can be assessed formally against these types of models. So the grievance is bad enough, right? It's when but then when you have this person that gets to that concept or the next stage of violent ideation, I wish somebody would kill you, or I want to kill you, or they start, I'm dreaming about or fantasizing about beheading you, or whatever it is. That's when they start, that's really that next stage, and that should really be an alarm bell where you need to start paying attention to someone. Now, the pathway to violence, we need to understand, though, it doesn't always have to be linear and one way. And that's an important thing when we talk about focusing on others, kind of like what Nate was talking about, servicing people. A lot of times, if we can get somebody some help or direct them to help at the grievance stage, a lot of times we can redirect them so that they don't progress up the pathway to violence. And that's one of the things when we think of it as a ministry, if we can get this person the help they need, we can keep them from progressing then into the planning stage. Now, when they get to the research and planning, that's where we start getting into it kind of intersects with the attack cycle. So, they start doing the research. They start looking at potential targets. They do that planning. And so that's really where, the training, the weapons, a lot of times in these cases with the aggrieved individuals especially, you do see forewarning. We see that in a lot of school shooters. Hey, don't go to school today. Something bad's going to happen. There'll be leakage. And the good thing is, a lot of times, those warnings, that leakage, it happens before the attack. So that's also one of these things where the see something, say something helps. And it can allow you to mitigate or prevent an attack if there's that communications that is able to get to the security team and let them know what's going on and what the threat is. So you want to make sure that the people are aware of what to report and how to report it. And then, of course, you have the preparation. You have the probing. The probing and breaching is an interesting thing. We definitely saw that in the Charleston attack against the church. We know that Dylan Roof had actually attended that Bible study the week before. So he had actually gone in without the weapon and was just checking the place out, right? He was scoping. He was kind of doing that probing and breaching and just testing that plan to see. And we've had many other examples of that kind of behavior. And then, of course, you have the attack. But the fact that these processes, the attack cycle, the pathway to violence, they exist. They are true in all of these attacks, in these different types of attacks. Of course, the pathway to violence is when you have the communication, and that's actually even better because it lets you interdict or become aware of the threat at an earlier stage than the attack cycle, where the attack cycle you're basically just picking up at the target selection stage instead of the grievance stage. But still, by understanding these models, it really helps you to be able to get proactive and to see these events as they're developing rather than just respond to them. Okay. Now, who can implement a protective intelligence plan? Any security team with the desire to do so. Now, you may not have the resources to launch a large program. You may not be able to put together a designated surveillance detection or counter-surveillance team, but you can still work to put together the tools needed for this type of program. After I left the government, I went to a company here in Texas called Dell Computer. And actually, it's interesting. I was never intending really to leave the government. I always thought I was a lifer. But shortly after we returned from Guatemala, my second son was diagnosed with leukemia. And at that point, being in the Foreign Service and having to travel overseas, I didn't know how his treatment was going to progress or anything. And I had an opportunity to leave the government and move over to Dell. And they just happened to have a world-class pediatric oncology group in Austin at the hospital there, the Dell Children's Center. And so we kind of made that break, and I went over to Dell. And at that time, Dell was growing very rapidly. That was in 1998. We were growing very, very rapidly. And they had just, basically their corporate security department had just had a couple former Austin Police Department guys. It was very small. And then all of a sudden they had to go to this global footprint of this company as they started putting, manufacturing facilities in Ireland, manufacturing facilities in Malaysia. And so it was just growing rapidly. So they brought a team of us over from the government to kind of set up a program. Now, initially there was about half a dozen of us only working on Michael's close EP team, the executive protection team. We had a few other people working with the children and the wife. But we weren't huge. But nevertheless, we believed enough in these processes and in these concepts, that we were able to institute them, with a relatively small team. So really, less than 20 guys for the whole corporate security at that point. But we started putting these processes in place. And when I was there as one of the team leaders on Michael's team, the executive protection team leaders, I traveled with him, was his shadow there for 6 years. But also I had the second duty of being the protective intelligence coordinator and working to put these principles into place. And the reason that we did that is because we trusted them. These things work. They are effective. They can help you stay ahead of the curve. And so even if you're in a smaller team, you can start using things like looking for surveillance. You can start using tools like databasing threats, assessing threats, using the tools that I'm going to be talking about in the second hour. So those tools are things that allow you to get ahead of that curve. As we think about the attack cycle, as we think about the pathway to violence, think about situations in your history or your church or even other churches that you know of, and think about how they apply. Think about these school shootings we're seeing, recent other shootings we're seeing. Almost all of those have those pre-indicators that allow you to get ahead and to stay proactive if people pay attention to them. But the problem that we see is that people don't pay attention to them. There again, focusing on the surveillance aspect and going back to that a little bit, most offenders just don't have that training. And so they have a tendency to, one, lurk, just kind of be out of place. One of the things that in order to be a really good surveillance operative, you need to have what they call, there's two things, right? Cover for action and cover for status. And so cover for action is just a reason to be where you are doing what you're doing. And cover for status is just kind of, why are you there? What is your kind of your story, or what are you trying to show yourself as when you're doing that surveillance? And unfortunately, or fortunately for us, most hostile actors just don't get any training in that, and so they tend to just lurk. There's no reason to be where they're doing. There's no reason for them. No story there, and so it's easy to kind of pick up on them because of that lack, or they have a just poorly thought out cover for status. I think of a guy sitting at the bus stop. And he's just sitting there, just trying to look like he's doing something. But every bus on that route that would stop there's already passed, and he's still at the bus stop. What's up with that? Why is he still there? One of the other things that we really focus on with picking up surveillance is demeanor, and that's one of the things where they generally stand out. They just have bad demeanor. Going back to that example that I had earlier of the guy looking to mug our client in New York, that's what allowed us to pick up on him, was just his demeanor. He's focused on that. He wasn't behaving like everybody else in the crowd. And generally, as you look out into this baseline of people that are going to be in your environment, you can see people that don't belong there, people that stick out. And a lot of that comes by paying good situational awareness, right? Being aware of what's around you, being aware of the people in your environment, who belongs there and who doesn't. And one of the things that you will do over time, especially in a church context, is you get an idea of who belongs in your environment and who doesn't. And all of our environments are going to be different depending on where your church is. If you're a rural church, inner city church, suburban church, it's all going to be a little bit different. But we all have a baseline. And there's all kind of a baseline of who the people are. And this isn't even, there again, I'm not talking about, racial or ethnic stereotypes. I'm talking about behavioral stereotypes, because it's going to cut across all of us. And as we look at these attacks, and the attacks that we've looked at over these last 3 or 5 years, we have attackers basically from all different ethnicities, from all different kind of backgrounds. So it's not just based on that, but it's really that demeanor and that belonging. And are they engaging with other people? I think of the incident that happened not too long ago at the church, where the guy had come into a fellowship meal, and he sat down and he was sitting by himself at the table in the corner. Some people had gone up, tried to engage him, tried to get him to participate. Hey, why don't you go up and get a meal? He just sat there and he was drinking at that corner table. Of course, then when somebody came up again, he pulled out the gun and started shooting at them. But he was out of place, and people recognized that he was out of place. But unfortunately, it didn't get to the point of security noticing and trying to interdict something happening. But really, when we look at a large church, it's like a campus like this, they may have the resources to put in these formal programs, to go out and get, there are some really cool programs right now on the corporate side, things like Ontic. I don't know if any of you guys are aware with Ontic. It's a really cool platform. It's something that I wish I had when I was at Dell back in the day, because all I had for tracking all of our, what we call POIs, persons of interest, was this janky SQL database. But I wanted something where I could store all the data rather than just files, but then also where I could share things with the team, in case we had information to share. But the Ontic platform is a really cool tool because it allows you to database everything in one place, but then it also kind of feeds stuff in. Now, that's a high-end platform. It costs a lot of money to get, but some of the larger churches could afford thousands of dollars for that kind of an application. But you don't need that kind of application to put these things into place. Anybody that has the desire can on a fairly modest budget put these the tools that we're going to talk about later into operation. So basically what I want to do is encourage anybody and everybody here to start thinking about these predicate behaviors. Start thinking about ways that you can communicate those to your staff. Thinking about ways that you can leverage security beyond just the security team. Because when we think about it, security is really everybody's job. It's not just the security team, it's a corporate thing. And I have some people say on the corporate side, also on the church side, well, should we talk about security? Are we going to scare people? No. People are already a little bit scared. I see that both on the corporate and in the church security side. People are already a little bit scared. They actually appreciate it when they realize that somebody is thinking about it and somebody has plans in place to try to counter it. So they actually feel more secure if you talk about threats and security than if you don't, if you just try to avoid it and bury it. So, reaching out to volunteers, reaching out to the church staff, reaching out to people like greeters, parking lot attendants, and if you can train them up to look for these attack indicators, those are the types of things that can really expand and leverage your capabilities, even if you're at a smaller church. My church, we have 250 people on a Sunday. In a Sunday service right now. We're a smaller church, but we take security seriously. I brief my greeters, my parking lot people, the people at the information desk, So, you can leverage your small team to become a bigger team just by, training people and then putting those processes in place. So basically anybody can do these things, can use these things. When we look at the indicators also, there are some pretty cool tools out there, and also tools that you can access through law enforcement and local law enforcement. And I'll talk a little bit later about liaison, but liaison is important. But as we're going through kind of the pathway to violence again, there are some pretty cool tools that you can use to help you analyze and assess the threats posed by people that have grievances, people that are starting to exhibit violent ideation. And so you can use these formal assessment tools to help you get to that point. Or you can reach out there again to law enforcement, make sure you communicate with them, and they can bring in a psychologist, or they can bring in somebody to help you. If you don't have those resources as your church, you can actually access those through liaison, through reaching out to other people, and they can help you do the assessments, which we'll talk a little bit about coming down. All right, I'm running a little bit ahead at this time, so I will stop, and I'll kind of open up for some questions. Sir?
So, thank you very much for your time. Do you use also, for churches, especially churches on low budgets, open source intelligence? I like to incorporate that. I learned that in my military service, where you can use local news networks and develop your predictive intelligence to kind of perhaps perceive any potential attacks or just rise in crime.
Yeah, so the question is, do you, can you use open source? Absolutely. I mean, yeah, not only in understanding what your threat environment is around you, but then again, looking at social media for those threats. Somebody that might be angry at the church, at the staff. And unfortunately, since the beginning of the church, there have always been disagreements, church splits. You have people that are angry over perceived slights. People can get really angry and upset over doctrine. So you have people that can really, become aggrieved, and by using things like social media, that can help you pick up on aggrieved individuals and then begin to monitor them in much the same way that we do on the corporate side for our corporate clients. We've got somebody that's upset at Executive X because they're doing this, or they're upset at this bank because they're investing in oil pipelines or some energy or whatever it is. So definitely, looking at that within a church context can be very useful. And a lot of these bigger churches will actually have information teams or communication teams that can also help you with that. And so some of the tools that they use can help you do some of that social media monitoring, and you can actually, while they may be looking at marketing terms or whatever, or ministry terms, you can also have them put some of the threat terms into those tools to leverage them. And then of course you can also just do Google searches, or use other tools like TweetDeck, stuff that's free if you have a limited budget, so that you don't have to, invest in high-end, $100,000 or whatever it is for data miner. Not everybody can afford that. So that, there's a lot of simple things that you can do just with, RSS feeds, the Google searches, Twitter searches. So there are other tools that you can use to find and identify those people. And of course, education goes a long way. So hopefully if you have other people in your congregation that might stumble across something, hey, John is upset. I just saw him on Facebook. He didn't like the sermon last week, or whatever it is. Any other questions? Come on. I can see the wheels turning. Sir.
I know you addressed this part of as far as surveillance, countering surveillance, but dry runs. We've had a couple of instances where we believe we had dry runs. Can you talk on that?
Yeah, no, the dry runs for sure, and that's one of the things when I was talking about the probing. If you go back to, and that's where that will come up here on the probing and breaching, the dry run. That's where that dry run is in this model, the pathway to violence. But it's definitely something that we see a lot. And it's something that in the terrorist context, we've been seeing for decades. And there again, we saw it in the Charleston shooting, where we had Root go up into that church before his attack. So it's definitely something to be aware of. And of course, I mean, let's face it, we have broken, often awkward people that come into church all the time, right? It just is. But when you pay attention for those people, well, number one, it gives you a great opportunity to minister them. If you're looking for broken people, hey, what's going on? You look like you're troubled. You look like, so sometimes you can kind of direct them into some counseling or get some help, but then they can also give you an opportunity to what we call take their temperature, right? Find out if they're angry about something. Find out what's going on there. But you can do it in a non-alarming, non-alerting way. And hopefully, kind of what Nate was talking about, rather than sending the uniform to jack them up, hopefully if somebody comes in with a softer touch, that can also work more towards de-escalation, which is where we're trying to get into escalation, right? That's the last thing we want to do is touch somebody off. So we want to try to talk them down, work them down, minister to them whenever we can. But certainly by focusing on that potential, the surveillance, the dry run, and a lot of times just by talking to somebody or working with somebody, you can actually dissuade them, and they'll think that, oh, I've been burned. They know what I'm up to. I might have to go to a softer target. So just by being vigilant, by paying attention, by reaching out to people, contacting them, kind of the touch point, right? You can sometimes dissuade them and make them think, a lot of times you may not even know what was going on in their brain, but just that interaction might make them think that you're a harder target than what you are. All right, another question? One of the things too, I'm going to, at the end here, I'm going to have my email address, but anybody that would like a copy of the PDF of that Concilium study on violence against churches, I will send it to you. So at the end, I'll put my email up, and just hit me up and I'll send you that. That's a really good, and I would encourage you to kind of look at Concilium and the Insight product that they have, the Insight Digest it's called, that comes around to churches looking at church security. And the idea is to kind of analyze, using a lot of the approaches that we would do for attacks, back in the day when I was at the government against embassies. We're actually really focusing on things against churches. So we're kind of looking at how the attack was planned, looking at that attack cycle, looking at these factors. And then there's a lot of some common things, and some of those I'm going to talk about a little bit. Well, let me. I got 7 minutes left here. Okay, so from 19 to, oh yes, sir.
Most police departments have a crime prevention officer or officer. If you receive a threatening phone call or a message in the mail or an email, you can go to that office or that officer and have that person or that situation investigated as a possible threat. They may be able to inform you, oh, look, that threat's gone to several places in the city, and it's probably a bogus. We've had that at our church, by the way. So that's one avenue that you can go through. Using your police department, they won't investigate, they won't give you names of people that are suspicious because of privacy. But you can ask them about somebody, and they will advise you that there's nothing or something there.
Yes, sir. And they're a huge, especially there again, if you have a smaller team, it's really, it's even more critical. If you're a large team, obviously you should be conducting liaison anyways. And we're going to unpack liaison a little bit, but liaison is critical. One of the other things that I find is that a lot of SWAT teams are always looking for places to train. So if you reach out to the local PD and kind of talk, they're like, yeah, maybe we could do a training at your facility. It's a great way not only to work on those relationships, but it gives them familiarity with your site. And so, God forbid there's ever an incident at one of your sites. But if there is, then they're familiar with it, they know the layout, and it's good. Especially in an inner city, or actually even a rural setting, a lot of times cops are looking for places that they can sit and write their reports. And so if you've got a place that they can sit, maybe a coffee maker, a desk, some Wi-Fi, some place where they can sit or even park their car, just to sit there and work and do the work that they need to be. They love stuff like that. So just by reaching out to them and making those contacts, offering these things, a restroom where they can hit. In a rural area like where I'm at, restrooms are at a premium. So, it's good if they know that there's a place where there's a nice, clean, safe place where they can use a restroom, get a cup of coffee, write a report if they need it. Those are all touch points that are really huge. All right, so real quick, on the attacks, there have been 73 incidents that were tracked by the Concilium team from 19 to just actually last month. Out of those 73 incidents, and I think this is huge, only 15 occurred on Sunday mornings. And a lot of our church programs focus on Sunday mornings, and a lot of churches don't have much else on other times. 14 of those actually happen on weeknights. So almost as many on weeknights as you have on Sunday mornings. 2 were actually on Sunday nights. 10 of them happened during office hours. So it wasn't even during church services per se, but it happened during office hours. 7 happened during funerals, which is just, and out of those 7, 5 involved funerals for gang members. Think about that. Depending where your church is, you could be at a higher risk of having some sort of a violent incident in your church at a funeral than during Sunday morning. 4 happened during fellowship meals. 1 happened during a wedding.
Shoot now or forever hold your peace, right?
Shoot now or forever hold your peace. Interesting though, out of the 73 incidents, only 28 happened indoors. 10 of those 73 were in the sanctuary or the auditorium. 43 happened outside. So there again, where are we putting our emphasis and where are we putting our focus? One of the things that we see is that most often the attacks are going to come from the outside in. It is going to start in the parking lot. And whether that's something like a Sutherland Springs type like event, usually it's going to progress from the outside in. And even in recent incidents we saw, Uvalde school shooting, where he shot at people outside before getting into the school. The Buffalo supermarket shooting, he started shooting people in the parking lot before going in. And so, as we're putting these programs in place and these the protective intelligence focus, we really need to look out at the exterior, at the parking lot, and make sure that that's where we have a focus of our attention. And one of the places, so we're not just looking, inside the sanctuary for the threats. We really need to have those proactive focuses beyond our walls, and look for that surveillance, look for that deployment. Look as the guy's pulling the gun out of his car, rather than just waiting till he gets through our front doors and is shooting. All right, I got like a minute and a half. Any other quick question before we go to our break and then come back? Yes, sir.
You have a bigger breakdown on the events that you said the 43 happened outside. Were those specific events, or were they Like, were they outdoor events, or were they just?
A combination of both. A lot of them where, for example, there was a incident where you had a former boyfriend shot the former girlfriend and a friend in the parking lot because he knew that she was at church on Wednesday nights, whatever. But actually, they're all broken down by place and everything in that Concilium report. They kind of have all the details of it all. So if you guys hit me up, and what I will do, I will put up on the, I'll go to the end here real quick during the break so that you have time to write this down. Oh wait, too far. And there's some guy with 3 thumbs or something that wrote out my email address, which is me. I have a typo in there. There should not be the second or the first B. It should just be Torchstone Global. It should not be Torchstone B Global. Yeah. But anyways, if any of you guys hit me up with that at that email, I will send you a copy of the Concilium report. It's a really good, and I would encourage you just to check out the Concilium Insight Digest for your church. It's fairly inexpensive to subscribe to, but they provide a lot of good information and analysis on attacks and violence against churches.
All right, we're going to take a 15-minute break. When you hear the music start up again, then please come back in here. All right? Break.
2. You guys did good.
No Q&A after.
No Q&A.
Unless you're running out.
All right, unless I'm running early. No Q&A. Actually, I saw that some of you guys have already taken me up on the email thing because my email kind of exploded, but that's good. I promise I'll get to y'all tonight when I get back to the hotel, and I can say y'all from my time living in Texas. That's when I knew I needed to leave, when my Pennsylvania-born wife started saying all y'all. She never got to fixing. I'm fixing to cook supper. She never got there, but she did learn how to cook really good fried okra. That was, when I was in the Army, I hated the okra because it was always like slimy and nasty, and so I'm thinking, oh man, I don't like okra. And then the neighbor lady showed my wife how to cook good fried okra, and I'm like, oh, that's good stuff. Okay, so the first hour we really focused on kind of what is protective intelligence, why use protective intelligence, how does it work, and who should use it. And hopefully by now you guys have figured out that everybody should be using some of these principles because it helps us to get proactive and to stay on that left of the boom side. One of the tools that I want to talk about is assessments. And assessments are a huge part of what I do every day in my civilian job, my secular job. We do assessments on corporations. So we're looking at office spaces, factories. We're looking at the CEO, whether it's his residence. We're looking at the vacation homes. We're looking at security program assessments. But one of the assessments that's very useful is a baseline threat assessment. And that basically means just getting an idea of what your baseline threat is in the area where your church is involved, or other places you have ministry. I mean, for some of you bigger churches, you may have folks over, abroad, or other parts, you may have branches in Mexico or wherever. But you really need to look at those locations where you have your people and really understand the threats that are posed to them. And at a corporate type assessment, we're going to be looking at, criminal actors. We're going to be looking at terrorist actors. A lot of times activists. We're going to be looking at mentally disturbed individuals. We're going to be looking at cyber and insider threats, both cyber insiders, external cyber threats. So we're going to be looking, and really many of those things pertain to churches. So, doing an assessment of your environment, of your neighborhood, looking at, crime stats. What are the crimes that are happening? Actually, a lot of incidents that happen at churches or in churches are not necessarily directed at the church. So we see a lot of incidents that are reported happening at a church, and actually that's one of the things that the Concilium report kind of weeded out. They didn't look at those, but you have a drug deal going down in your parking lot, or something else is happening criminally there. So those things can really have an influence on your church. So understanding that, and there again, that's something that you can usually find online. There's some really cool online resources as far as looking at crime rates and incidents of crime, police reports, but also liaison is huge, which I'll talk more about liaison later. But that baseline assessment, even thinking about things like, and the more, as we progress kind of in this downward spiral in our country, activism is becoming more and more of a threat, right? Whether it's now the pro-abortion activism, other activism for homosexual rights, things like that, people that have grievances against our churches because of these issues. We can not only have to worry about the mentally disturbed individuals who are fixated, have a grievance but we have to worry about activism. We have to worry about protesters showing up, protesting in front of our facilities and churches. Even in my little community, we have kind of a liberal college there. And we've had college students show up at some of the local churches protesting them because of their stand on LGBT issues. So it's something, but so you need to understand what those potential actors are and what threats they pose. And then also looking again at the indicators. Cyber threats. I mean, there again, we're always thinking about, the guy coming through the door with a gun as an active shooter. But we're probably much, much more likely to be hit with a cyber attack as an institution than we are a physical attack. The same thing with worrying about our kids and sexual assaults and stuff. And the last couple times I was here, they had a guy that was talking about, what was that, Ministry Safe, was it? That was a really good presentation. But there again, your chances of being victimized by a pedophile as a church are probably 10,000 times greater than having an active shooter. It's just what it is. So those are all these types of things that you need to work into that baseline assessment to understand really what's going on around you, what the threats are, how they're going to look, and what you need to worry about as a security program. Facility assessments. What are your doors and locks like? Do they work? Are they adequate? How about your key inventory? Who has keys for your church? How many people that have left your church still have keys to your church? Do you know? We don't know. So, really looking at facility assessments, where are our vulnerabilities? Are there places where we don't have good light, maybe in the parking lot where we could have that drug deal go down? Do we need to think about some additional security type lighting? What are our vulnerabilities? Even thinking about things like, what do we do with our doors on Sunday morning during a service? What doors are locked? What doors are unlocked? How do we cover those? And really looking for vulnerabilities there in places that you can tighten up that security by assessing it. A lot of the things, when you're doing these too, I think it helps to go in with a mindset of almost a red team. Okay, if I was a hostile actor wanting to do something here, here's how I would attack this facility. Here's how I would get in. Here's what I would do. And that by kind of going through that red team exercise, that can a lot of times help you identify those critical places that you really need to lock down and to prevent the problems from happening. Program assessments. And by this I mean your security program. When's the last time you really assessed your security program? I mean, have you been doing things the same way for the last 10 years? Do we need to change our security posture because of the baseline threat assessment? Has the threat changed enough that we need to rethink what we're doing? So really looking at your security program. I would also kind of put on kind of under that, not only security, but then also ministry program assessments. Are there ministry programs that we do that are more vulnerable than others? Whether that's an inner city outreach, a soup kitchen. Look at the number of activities that we've had with benevolence, or the number of problems with benevolence ministries. Looking at those types of vulnerabilities. Do we need to think about doing a risk assessment for a funeral? Given the fact that we've had so many attacks happen at churches during funerals. Is this something that we need to look at or not? Are there other events that could perhaps draw Do we have a speaker coming into our church that might be controversial? Somebody that maybe they're going to be protested against by some activists, whether it's LGBTI or whether it's pro-abortion or something. Are they drawing problems and potential threats into our church? So those assessments are all helpful in gauging and understanding your threat, because how can you realistically design a security program without first understanding the threats that are there, right? That really needs to be your basis for designing your program, is having that baseline understanding of what the threats are to your facility, what the potential threats are. Public profile assessments. This is something that, especially if you're in a church with a high-profile pastor, that you might want to really consider. And we do this a lot on my daytime job at Torchstone. We do this with a lot of our high-profile entertainment, CEO type individuals. We will do a public profile assessment where what we do is we dig in, and they're again coming from a red team angle. We pretend that we're a stalker who wants to attack that target, and then we go and we dig up everything we can on the internet on that person and see what we can find that would help us in conducting an attack against that person. It's pretty amazing how much stuff is often out there. We also, in addition to just the regular OSINT stuff, we'll do deep and dark web. But then we also will look at some of the data aggregators. And they're actually pretty scary. The Spokios, the Ben Verified, the Friend Finders, all these services where for a couple bucks you can order a profile of somebody that will provide a whole lot of information that basically comes from all that stuff. When you buy something online and you put in your address and your phone number, blah, 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 or you open an account someplace, or you get a free app, but in order to download that app, you have to give your identifying information. A lot of those people, that's how they make their money, is selling you. You're the product. And so they're selling your information to these data aggregators. And so even if you have an unlisted telephone number, they can't find it through whitepages.com or whatever, often they can find them through these data aggregators. And removing that information can be very, very difficult. But by putting together this public profile assessment, it helps you know what's out there. Also, though, more importantly, it helps you know what's not out there. What isn't available? What do I need to really work to protect? The other thing, once you figure out what's out there, you can also work through some of the information removal services, then to try to knock down the information from those data aggregators. And that can it can sometimes almost seem impossible, but it actually is possible to get some of that taken down. Now, if your pastor or whoever you're doing the public profile assessment on is just putting stuff out openly, blatantly, there's not a lot you can do, right? We had a client who was a CEO of a very large hedge fund, and unfortunately his wife is an actress that does a lot of theater. And we could not convince her to stop posting stuff on Instagram and Twitter. And even personal stuff, like showing where they live, where the kids go to school, even down to the point of, you could almost pattern her picking the kids up. You could figure out what she's driving. It would have been very easy to target her or the kids because of what she was posting herself on Instagram and Twitter. But she refused to stop doing that. And you can point those things out, though, and many times, the people will, start to rein things in. Looking at what they're sharing. It's one thing to share professional things, but you can do that without the personal. And certainly, with many of our pastors, they're public figures, and for many of them, it's important for them to build their brand. And so you have to kind of work with them, it's kind of a fine line there, but there is a place where they can post the public stuff without giving up all the private stuff. So they can put stuff about a sermon series. Now obviously everybody's going to know where they're going to be at Sunday morning at 11 o'clock, right? That's you can't not protect them against that. But you can protect them from showing where they're going to be having dinner Sunday night, where somebody could potentially target them, or where their kids are playing baseball or whatever. So really working with them to tighten down their social media profiles and perhaps even dividing their social media. So they have one account for their friends and family that's locked down, where they're sharing that personal stuff on Facebook. Junior got a home run. Oh, great. But they don't have to put that on the public-facing side. They can kind of keep the more professional stuff there. One of the other things that we find through public profile assessments is quite often it's not the protectee themselves that are sharing stuff, but it's like some other person in their family. With me, it's my sister-in-law. My sister-in-law puts everything on Facebook. Where she was yesterday, what she had for lunch, what she's doing tomorrow. And unfortunately, she drags a lot of the family into that too. And so I had to stop tagging me, because I don't want. But you can also then find those people and hopefully go with your pastor or that other high-profile individual, and then have their family members also start to lock down that coverage that they have, or at least not tag them so that they're not so easily found. But the public profile assessments are just a really good tool. The other thing that's helpful there again is it tells you what's out there but what's not. So you can also do a gap analysis based on that, and that can show you what information you need to protect. Okay, this isn't out there yet. Nobody knows, like I just worked a stalker case this week, and fortunately the woman was really good at cranking stuff down, and so the stalker has no idea what her current home address is. So he actually reached out to the boyfriend through the boyfriend's work, because that's public facing. But fortunately, the home address was blocked. So we were able to advise him, okay, listen, continue to protect that, continue to keep that locked down. But the boyfriend's going to have to be careful leaving the office, because that's a known location that the stalker could then pick up and try to follow him back to the house or whatever. So knowing what's not out there is important. Also, when it comes to data aggregators, not aggravators, there are some services for removal out there. Probably the best one I've encountered is a company called 360 Privacy, and they were actually started out by a country music star. They're based out of Nashville, and he got angry because he couldn't get his personal data down. But the problem with that is that they're fairly expensive. So unless you're a huge church with a very, very high profile pastor, probably the 360 Privacy is not going to be there. But there are some other things, like one of the services is called Delete Me. I think that's about $150 a year. The problem is, though, is that the number of sites that they cover and the frequency that they knock stuff down is not as good. So like the Delete Me, I think they do like only 200 sites, and they do it every quarter. Whereas 360 Privacy is like every day, and they cover like 1,000 sites or something. But it starts out at like $5,000 a year, so it's much more expensive. But still, those are good tools out there to try to get that information and critical information out there, so that your pastor's not vulnerable, especially if there's been threats. And we do have some very high-profile pastors who have been, kind of placed into the crosshairs by the positions that they've taken on certain topics and events. Think about the criticism that guys like Franklin Graham out of Samaritan's Purse have received. And actually, Samaritan's Purse has an excellent security program. I don't know, their GSOC, their Global Security Operations Center, is actually better than like Walmart's. It's pretty amazing. You go there to their place in Boone, it's really impressive. It's world class. Of course, they have people in Yemen and all these really terrible places too. But it's a world class, and it shows that Christian organizations can achieve that and can really get a robust protective intelligence program when they need it. Formal threat assessments of POIs. Excuse me, I'm going to finish this before it gets really cold. We were talking earlier kind of about the, that pathway to violence. And when somebody, kind of gets that, starts to set off some alarm bells for you, starts to concern you with their behavior, with the grievance, maybe we're starting to see some violent ideation in some of the communications we have with them. I was talking to a gentleman kind of after the break. There's a lot of ways you can pick up on that, and whether that's in-person talking, whether it's, we had talked about earlier, the social media stuff, whether it's through a third person. You really want to, once you start to have suspicions about a person that may be progressing along the pathway to violence, you really want to do your best to try to assess that person and gather as much information as you can. But there are some really cool tools out there for formal assessments. You have like the waiver is a good one. That's actually workplace violence related, but there's a lot of the behavioral aspects and on the waiver questionnaire that can be very applicable to a church environment, because it's really an insider threat, not just a workplace violence threat. But there are some tools out there, and some of those tools you can get through the police officers, police departments in your area. Sometimes if you have very concerns that you think raise that criminal level, through your local FBI office, etc. All right. So that was assessments, and I really want to encourage you. And if you don't have that capability to do the assessments yourself, reach out to some people that can maybe help you. And whether that's, you can find somebody to volunteer to help, or whether somebody you even have to pay a little bit of money to, it would really be worth your time, especially when it comes to the formal threat assessments on POIs. Sometimes it's really good to have that psychologist working on that case. That's one of the things that I really enjoy about my current company. We actually have a psychologist on staff. And so when we have those issues, we can refer those to her, and she can actually do a formal assessment workup on those individuals. Those cost money though. So that's something that you need to be aware of. All right, liaison. Law enforcement is critical. And depending where you're at, and depending on your footprint as a ministry, that might be at all levels, right? Well, whether it's the state level, the local, the county level, federal level. And sometimes if you're a big enough church, you may have those connections right within your church, right? You might have a trooper and an FBI agent in your congregation, people that you can identify to reach out. And they may not be the exact person to do that liaison, but they can often connect you with those people that have that function. And there usually is that kind of function within most departments, to kind of work with you and help set up that liaison. As I mentioned earlier, just doing little things to foster cooperation and work on your relationships. A friend of mine at a church in Arkansas, he actually works and they have classrooms that they kind of donate to the local police department for some of their, like the sergeant tests and stuff. So they'll come and do some of their training or do some of their testing in the church because they have these nice classrooms. And so, it's just a nice opportunity. At my church, we do something called Cookies for Cops. And we go and we just take big old platter of cookies a couple times a year. And I'll tell you what, the guys love it. When you just show up and you have your the little old church ladies make some good cookies. So, you show up with a nice big platter of cookies, some coffee, and the guys love it. And there again, it's about fostering that relationship. First of all, letting them know that we care about them. And right now, if you think about the society at large and kind of the hatred and disdain that cops are receiving on the street, just having some folks in the community come and say, hey man, we appreciate you guys, we love you, have a cookie on us. It sounds goofy, but it's really helped build a lot of rapport and relationship. And those are the types of things that, can go a long way, towards helping you. And that gives you, the thing is, if you wait until you have a crisis to reach out to somebody, that's just not good. It's much better if you have the relationship ahead of time and you're a known quantity so that they know you're not a nut, that you're not the nut, and that you have that, they know you, so you're a known quantity. And so when you have an issue, they understand that it's serious, that it's for real, that you're for real. And then you can go to them and you have that confidence and that relationship set up. So really having that liaison in place ahead of time is huge. As I mentioned earlier, the training thing is really good. If you have them come and train at your facility, it's very helpful. Other churches, hallelujah! The Baptist church down the road, they're not your enemy. Those Methodist people, whoever, they're not your enemy. We're the body of Christ. We're supposed to be working together. But so many times, if you think in your community, how many churches are there? How many significant churches are there? How many of us, though, in our security programs, reach out to these other churches? Now, I'm kind of in a fortunate situation in that I'm kind of seen as a resource. So I do training for a lot of the churches in my area. So I've got that liaison set up. But certainly I would really admonish you to reach out to your brothers. Reach out to that security director at the church across town. Have coffee, have lunch, set up something so you guys are having a monthly coffee. You're sitting and talking. Because what's going to happen is kind of what we had talked about earlier. Some of these actors may be known to the other churches. That's one of the things that for about 15 years now, we have something set up at the sending agency level called the Risk Management Network. And what we were finding is that a lot of missionary groups were having issues in countries, kidnappings, extortion, other serious problems, and they weren't telling anybody else about it. And so what was happening is that these other organizations then were also being victimized because there was no information sharing. But the reason for no information sharing, because there was no relationship, there was no trust. They didn't trust each other. So you didn't have the Southern Baptist IMB wasn't talking to frontiers or pioneers, or they weren't talking to new tribes, or ethnos, 360 now. There just wasn't that communication going on. And so we found that it was hugely important just to have a place where people could meet, develop those relationships so that they could share information. And that's one of the things that I would really, really encourage you in your communities. Reach out to the other churches. Find out that point of contact. Share information. It can be really huge. And there again, they might have an individual that's a problem child that could end up diverting to you. You don't know, and so you really need to share that information ahead of time. We had a mentally disturbed individual probably 15 years ago that visited our church. And fortunately, we were able to kind of de-escalate the situation, talk him down. He just kind of he was a little bit disruptive. We didn't end up getting in fisticuffs with him, which was good. We were able to kind of deflate him, just kind of send him on his way gently. But then, the next week he showed up in another church and created a big hullabaloo when they decided to jump on him instead of de-escalating. But, we were kind of guilty for not sharing information and giving them the heads up, hey, you got to worry about this dude. So it's really important for us to share that information with other churches because really we're not enemies. We're really striving for the same goal, and we want all of God's people to be safe. Area businesses and organizations, NGOs. Depending, there again, where your church is, if you're in this kind of a urban environment, what's the company next door to you? What do they have going on? Could they be dragging problems to your church? Is it an oil company next door? And could you have Extinction Rebellion kind of come through here on their way to that energy company or whatever? So talk to those security people at the area businesses, and if they don't even have a security program, just talk to the management and share information, because a lot of times they may know about things going on that you don't know. They can be a great source of information for you. Things that they see happening. They may have different hours, right? You may only be open Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, whatever. They may be 24/7. So they may be seeing a lot more happening in your neighborhood than what you're aware of. So by reaching out to them, establishing a relationship, sharing information, you can gather a lot of great intelligence that otherwise you wouldn't have access to. Organizations the same way. Is there a city mission? or some organizations that are feeding the homeless or whatever. They may also be able to help if you have a similar mission. And they may be able to tell you about individuals that have been problematic and share information and intelligence with. So really reaching out to those area businesses, organizations, huge. Protective details of VIP congregants. You might have people in your church. When I was in Guatemala, we actually had the former vice president was one of our congregants. And that was an issue in itself, right? Because he was actually dragging stuff to us at our church because of the political stuff going on there. So you need to know who they are. You had Nate talking earlier about dealing with people like a Bieber or a Kardashian. They're going to have their own executive protection detail. So you, as a church security, need to have that liaison with them so that you can discuss things. They may know of POIs. Mentally disturbed individuals and stalkers that are targeting that VIP that you're unaware of. And so sharing that information can be huge so that you know what's going on. So, if you do have protective details or VIPs, and even if they don't have a protective detail per se, if you have a city councilman, a mayor, state representative, whoever it is coming to your church, it's important that you talk to whoever has oversight for security of them, whether that's the state police, whether that's the county police, whoever it is, the sheriff's office, that you share that information. You want to know about the judge. That judge may have threats against them, and so you want to know about those kind of things. Okay, so we just talked about information collection through liaison. That is huge, and I just can't emphasize that enough, and unfortunately we don't do enough of that. Social media monitoring, where we had gone to before. And there again, this can be anything from something that is fairly large with dedicated people, just to something informal, where you have the people on your team and maybe the ministry staff, and anything that comes in that's troubling or concerning is passed on then to the security team. Because we're seeing more and more. Almost all of these attacks recently, whether it's these school attackers, we're seeing social media elements there, where they're really showing a lot of disturbing content, whether they're fixated on school shooters, whether they're fixated on violence against animals. There's just a lot of disturbing content that these people are looking at. So if you find out that Junior is a Columbiner, and the Columbiners, people that are fixated on school shootings, they kind of idolize the Columbine people. You should know about that, and it would be really good if somebody told you that Junior is a Columbiner, so that you're aware of that within your church context. You may have a church school. You definitely want to know about that there. Observations of security team members. So many times we work in kind of a disjointed manner. And we may have a fairly large, Nate was talking about having 100 volunteers. That's 100 sets of eyes. But are they talking to each other? Are the guys working Sunday morning passing information to the people working Sunday night or Wednesday? Do the Wednesday night team know what happened Sunday morning? So you really need to have a process in place to collect that information from your team members so that you can disseminate it more broadly. And whether that's some sort of a report, hey, here's a security report for this Sunday. This is what happened on August 14th at the church. Here's what, Wednesday night observations. And it may be nothing. We didn't see anything. But at least getting into the concept of collecting that information and disseminating it is very important, because that's a lot of information falls through the cracks because it's not shared. Observations of other staff. So the pastoral staff, your parking people, your greeters, your coffee bar people, all of these people, think about it, even in a large church, okay, you may have 100 security guys, but you might have a couple, 200-300 volunteers. You may, the Sunday school teachers, the small group leaders. There's a lot of people out there that are going to have, or are more likely to have interaction with the potential problem child than the security team. And so by having those other sensors out there, you can really broaden your ability to collect that information. And so you need to be able to have that contact with them so that they can channel that information into you, and they need to know what to report, how to report it. And that needs to be very clear. All right, your texts, emails, letters to the pastor, other staff. This is the kind of stuff, there again, people need to know about it. It needs to be database, it needs to be collected, it needs to be preserved. And whether it may not raise to the level of a formal threat where you can actually get law enforcement involved, at least initially, but you do want to preserve this stuff if it's troubling. You want to somehow retain it and database it. And then if you have somebody who's kind of a constant communicator, you want to evaluate those over time to see if there are changes in their demeanor, changes in their language, if there are signs that they're progressing along that pathway to violence. Are their grievances becoming more pointed? Were they general at the beginning, and now they're becoming very focused on one person? It's just the youth pastor they're angry at. And so you want to kind of track that. Are there signs of violent ideation? Are they talking about guns? So you want to collect this stuff and you want to keep it. You want to database it so that you have it as a reference, and that so you can use it to watch for that trend, that trend over time. So just don't delete it. Don't get rid of this stuff. You want to keep it, retain it as best you can, and then obviously analyze it to the best of your ability. And of course, that stuff will also be helpful if there is a threat made at some point. You can go and you can, when you're talking actually to the police, well, yeah, this person's been communicating with us for 18 months now. Here's all the past correspondence that shows that focus of interest in our pastor over these 18 months. And so a lot of times that will help solidify what you're saying instead of, I think we may have heard from this person before, or but having that information at your fingertips then allows you to make a much stronger case. All right, surveillance, detection, and protective surveillance. So we talked a little bit about that earlier. How bad guys are bad at surveillance. The problem is that we're not usually watching for them, and that's why we don't see when they're doing that pre-operational surveillance. So your security team really needs to be aware of these concepts of the attack cycle. They need to be aware of what hostile surveillance looks like. One of the best things that we do a lot of times in training to train people on how to detect surveillance is by making them conduct surveillance. Because by making somebody conduct surveillance, then you understand better what someone has to do to surveil a facility or to surveil a person. And really, when you think about it thoughtfully, there are constraints that are placed upon you if you want to conduct surveillance on something, right? So that person, that hostile actor who wants to conduct surveillance, has certain constraints. He has to be in a certain place to see certain things if he's going to be trying to, and whether that's directed at our facility, whether it's directed at a member of the staff or something, if they're going to surveil something, they have to be in a place where they can see it. And by understanding that then, you can start looking in those places for potential surveillance. In surveillance terminology, we have something that we call perches. It's a perch where you would be. So whether you're going to try to see somebody leave the residence, see somebody leave the office, there are certain perches that you would be that were just ideal places to look, for surveillance. If you want to, watch the office or the front of the church, there's certain places that you would need to be. And by identifying those perches, then and communicating that to your security team, you can then start to pay attention to those places and look for activity at there. Now, there's actually some pretty cool camera technology that's out there that allows you to kind of alert when there's activity in certain places. And one of the things that I'd recommend doing is making sure you have camera coverage on those perches, and that you're alerted whenever there's somebody there, so you can see whether or not it looks like potential surveillance. We do that a lot on the corporate side. It's very, very successful. And it's not just against people. Surveillance against facilities, you can also use these tools against. When I was at Dell, we not only used these programs to protect Michael and his family, but then we also expanded it to protecting our manufacturing facilities and both incoming and outgoing cargo. Because believe it or not, the amount of money that a shipment of microprocessors, if you have a tractor trailer full of microprocessors, it's some unbelievable amount of money, like $50 million or something like that. The same thing with the tractor trailer full of laptop computers, like many millions of dollars. And so those shipments were highly coveted by cargo thieves. And there are actually these professional gangs of cargo thieves. Many of them work out of, they're actually kind of Cuban related out of Miami. They'll go all over the country looking to hit high value cargo theft. And what they do is they pick them up at the factory, they'll follow the truck, and then wait for the truck driver to make a mistake. Whether it's going to a rest area or a truck stop or whatever. And many times they'll actually either take the whole truck or they'll just take the trailer from the truck and take off with it. But we found that by setting up and looking for surveillance, watching for watchers around our manufacturing facilities, we were actually able to pick up on some of these cargo theft rings and call them into the cops. And actually, we were successful in wrapping up. Some of these have been victimizing us because we were just starting to look for it. So just by alerting our uniformed guards and our roving guards to what surveillance looked like, potential purchase, looking for for activity in those areas, it really helped us avoid a lot of areas. Same thing when we were working on the schools with our kids. Just by looking at purchase, looking at demeanor and behavior. Now, we didn't have anybody try to kidnap our kids, but by focusing on their schools, we actually were able to round up 3 pedophiles during my time there that were at that school and were trying to target because of demeanor, surveillance, and working on these concepts. So it does work, and it can also work against for a facility, not just EP. Identifying the purchase. Manipulating hostile surveillance. This is something, and I just mentioned, I just put a piece up on, we have a thing called The Watch on our torstoneglobal.com website, and I put a lot of good stuff up. I have got stuff up there on OODA loop, situational awareness, how to kind of help survive or avoid mass casualty attacks. But I just did one that just published yesterday on messing with their heads or manipulating surveillance. So, once you understand how surveillance works and how you understand how purges work, there's a lot of cool stuff that you can do, especially from a church or a facility side, a security team side. One of the things that I like to do is what we call heating up the perch. And so what you can do is that's where you send, if you've got your uniform guy, your off-duty cop, you send them and have a very overt presence maybe in some of those perches. Number one, it can hopefully dissuade people from being there. But then what I like to do is leave one perch alone. Or ostensibly so it looks alone. And that's like my honey trap, right? So what I want is I want them to go there because the other places are hot. And so I'm trying to divert them into that spot so that I can pay low-key attention, but paying attention to what's going on there, in a more clandestine manner, if you will, less recognizable to them, so that I'm driving them where I want them to be, so that I can recognize it easier. So there's a lot of things there that you can do to really mess with their heads and make them do what you want them to do. Of course, the other thing about it, just by being surveillance aware and by paying attention to those people in your parking lot, you're going to avert a lot of problems. It's going to be like the Pittsburgh guy, the Syrian guy that was looking at the Shia mosque. Oh, this is too hard. I'm not going to attack this target. I'm going to go to the easier target down the way. I got 17 minutes. LPRs, license plate readers. Those are really powerful tools, especially if you have a bigger campus. We use them a lot, both in VIP residential security, but also in corporate security. And there's actually some cool functionality into systems like ONTIC, where you can actually have an API where your license plate reader cameras are actually, feeding information against there and looking against your POIs. So if you have a POI license plate and they show up at one of your facilities, you get a flag and an alert. Hey, John Smith just showed up at the residence and drove by. That's a really, really cool tool. They also have some functionality where they will work with some of the LPRs on some of these toll roads. And there's that data. So it's nice to know that, hey, John Smith is in Austin or in Dallas. So there's some powerful stuff. But you can also do that within your church if you have those kind of capabilities. Databasing. Okay, so we talked about all these tools so far. We talked about your assessments. We've talked about collecting stuff on POIs. We talked about liaison, gathering information from our partners, from our own security teams, right? From the staff. But none of that is important if it all goes into the circular file. If it's just trashed, it needs to be organized so that it can be searched and cross-referenced. And whether that is using some high-end solution like an ONTIC, or whether it's just you with your own little SQL database that you're running organizationally, it's something that you can do. And it's something that I really, really want to encourage you to do at your churches, is make sure that you are keeping information pertaining to these threats and threat actors so that it can be retained, so that it can be looked at, so that it can be seen over time. And some of these things may develop slowly over time. And so it's important to know and to be able to track potential threat actors. And the only way you can do that is databasing. If nobody's talking, if nobody's keeping things, you don't know if the Sunday morning people saw the same person the Wednesday night people saw and they were both troubling. You can't connect those dots. You don't know about the social media problem here that person has. You can't connect those dots. And that's why the databasing is important, so that you can keep track of those potential threats and indicators of those potential threats as they're evolving. It's just huge. Otherwise, it's just kind of a waste of your time. An investigative component too is huge, right? So if you're collecting the intelligence, you need somebody to kind of analyze it. You need somebody to investigate it. Obviously, as private citizens, a church security team sometimes our ability to talk to people may even be greater, right? Because generally, from a law enforcement perspective, they need some sort of a reasonable suspicion, or they need to be able to articulate a reason why they're stopping and talking to somebody. As a citizen, I can talk to anybody. Especially if I'm approaching it with that ministry mindset, right? So you actually have a lot of liberty just to take people's pulses, so if you see people at those perches that could be potential surveillance, have somebody walk up and just talk to them. Hey, how you doing? Welcome to our church. Can I help you get? So you see somebody that has bad demeanor, somebody that looks angry, somebody that's showing bad, physical. Signs of aggression, or signs of being problem. Take their temperature. Have somebody come up and talk to them. You might have to get to that investigative component. Okay, we had this guy. He wouldn't talk to us. We didn't get his name. We don't know his. But we got a tag. He went to this car. We got a tag. So we can look that kind of thing up. And you need to have that ability then to kind of try to figure out who that person is, and then investigate. If there's more information you can gather about that person. Maybe that's going out and looking at that person's social media after there's been a problem. Maybe it's running criminal checks on them. Using some of those data aggregators that we talked about on the problematic side for us, but they can also be a good tool, and anybody can use them. Right? As long as we're not using them for credit issues, or we're not using them for housing or employment, we're pretty free to run just checks on these people with your, I don't know, what is it, $49 Ben Verified account. You can run these tags, run somebody's name, figure out if they have an arrest record. Training. I got 12 minutes. Training is huge, right? And hopefully you guys get that through what you've had here, but also training not just on this tactical response stuff, not just shooting, but training on spotting hostile surveillance, training on demeanor, training on de-escalation. And that's something, again, somebody had mentioned to me earlier that they recommend to their team the verbal judo stuff. That's huge. That being able to de-escalate is huge. And unfortunately, culturally, many of us that come out of a law enforcement or military background have received that training on kind of the ask, tell, make model. Okay, I'm going to ask you to leave my church. I'm going to tell you to leave my church, and I'm going to make you. And so it's escalatory. Instead of working the other way around and really trying to de-escalate and trying to use soft skills. Soft skills are, if I had my choice between training my people on soft skills or hard skills, and hard skills, I'm talking about weapons, I would go for soft skills every time. They're actually more important, and you're going to use them more than you are the hard skills. Lord forbid you're ever going to need the hard skills, right? We want to get to that point where we don't. We want to prevent. We really want to stay on that side. But yeah, so your security team members really know, they need to understand the attack cycle. They need to understand the pathway to violence. They need to know what to report, how to report it, what format you want, and who to report it to. The pastor and the staff, the same thing. People need to know who to come up to, and actually, hopefully, it even gets to the point of the congregation knows who you are, as a security person. And I have that happen. Hey, I was sitting next to this guy in the service, and he just looked really troubled. He was just really, there's something going on there. Can you talk to him? And I do. But there again, if you have the ministry mindset, hey, yeah, this guy is crushed. His wife just left him with the kids. He's no threat to us, but he's just broken. He's a broken person. He needs help. He needs some ministry. He needs some love. And there's things that we can do to help him. There's some counseling that we can bring there. He's not going to shoot him, but it's figuring out what it is the important part. But yeah, so the pastor and staff, the volunteers, there again, parking lot attendants, the greeters, the ushers, the nursery workers. There are so many sets of sensors within the church, and many times we don't tap those sensors. So actually going and doing some formal training on these behavioral things, talking about the pathway to violence, getting to the point where the pastor and the staff knows to let you know when somebody's got a protective order on them. Crazy enough, there are churches where you have those situations and the security staff isn't aware of it. They don't even know. And the nursery staff may. Oh yeah, hey, Jan Smith said that she has a protective order against her husband because he's threatened to kill her and take the kids. Well, that never gets communicated beyond maybe just the nursery staff. So having that communication going up and down to the security staff is huge, so that you know when there are those issues. And yeah, when you got John Smith that shows up and wants the kids and he's drunk and angry, that you're not taken by surprise. You know about the situation, you've got some background, you know that there's actually a protection order in place. That also gives you tools, and if you need to take action, you need to call the police, you're just better equipped. So having that reporting and that information sharing is huge. All right, I'm going good. I got 8 minutes left. All right. So, why bother having a protective intelligence program when you can just add security officers to create a harder target? This is actually something that we've seen happening in places like Mexico. Basically what happens is, if a hostile actor is allowed to conduct surveillance unhindered, if they're allowed to plan as they want, if they're allowed to observe your security operation freely at will, that's going to give them the ability and the capability to plan an attack to overcome any security that you have in place. And if you think about some of these crazy attacks we've seen in places like Mexico against, the director of the National Police and whatnot with their protective details, because you've got guys that show up with 15 dudes in a dump truck and a 50 caliber, sniper rifle. They can plan around your security if they're allowed to plan. And so what you need to do is not just really look, at adding security, but you need to get proactive and look for those signs and really prevent them the freedom to plan and then execute that attack. So armed security alone is not a guarantee of security, and we've seen that all over the world. You see attacks against protected people all the time. The best protection is detecting and avoiding an attack before it is launched. And this protective intelligence program that we're talking about is the way that we make that happen. That's how we become proactive. That's how we prevent these attacks. And I'm here to tell you it works. I mean, I have literally placed myself, my life on these things. I have placed the lives of my protectees on these things. It works. You can see problems developing if you're looking for trouble. It's there. But you just have to be aware of these things. You have to be looking for it, and then that allows you to really avoid it. They're very, very powerful tools. And I really do encourage you to consider ways that you can adapt these things to your church security team, no matter what size it is. Whether it's 5 people, whether it's 500. There are things here that you can do to really make your team more effective, more proactive, and more left to the boom. All right, I've got 6 minutes left. I'm early. Questions?
Somewhat related to the hostile surveillance manipulation, going back to the public profile assessment in the cyber world, we talked about limiting or controlling what people post
Yes.
on social media. Are there any programs, protocols, and discussions relative to putting out disinformation to divert or confuse?
No, okay, so the question was, in addition to limiting information that's out there, are there protocols for putting out disinformation or bad information? Yes, there are. And actually, that's one of the services at a higher end that 360 Privacy does. So they can not only work to have information removed, but they also have at kind of like this concierge level where they will put out bad information to try to bury the real information. So there are and there are ways that you can also do that, although you have to be careful because you don't want to violate kind of the terms of services of any of the social media stuff by kind of like that bot action or whatever. But there are ways, and there are some tools that can be used to kind of put out enough bad information to bury the real results down if there is something there. But I would definitely advise that you work with somebody that knows what they're doing, that is kind of a professional or semi-professional in that area, so that you don't want to do something unethical or illegal, right? And you certainly don't want to be bounced off of a social media platform. But there are things that can be done to kind of put that information and kind of bury it under the Google algorithms. But I would go through a professional. I can't do that myself. I would never do that myself. Sir.
In our church, we have 2 churches. We use a program called GroupMe for notifying anybody that's in our security team. When anybody tells somebody, they can put it in there and notify everybody immediately. Are there any other app?
So you say that you're at your church with the 2 campuses, you use GroupMe.
GroupMe, yeah. It allows us to immediately put data in there that immediately goes out to everybody.
Okay.
Security, church staff, stuff like that.
Now, does that come out through like SMS texts, or what is your?
No,
Just a messaging app.
Oh, it's a messaging app then.
Build a group.
It's
Okay.
not encrypted.
It's not encrypted. Okay, but yeah, I mean, certainly you can use things, I mean, I really like when it comes to encrypted stuff. I really like Signal.
Yes.
I mean, Telegram's out there, but I think the Signal's probably about one of the best ones that's out there. I'm actually on some WhatsApp groups too, which I'm not quite as enthusiastic about. I try to avoid Telegram if I can, and some of the others. But certainly, yeah, having those kind of group communications is important. One of the things, there again at the high end, with like an ONTIC, it's very nice because it not only databases, but with the push of a button, you can issue like BOLOs and stuff. Which is so. I mean, there are applications that are out there, but certainly just even having on your security team, having everybody on a Signal group is a good way to kind of get that instant communication. But I'm certain that there are other apps out there that could be just as effective. All right, I've got 2 minutes, sir.
We use GroupMe countywide. All the churches in our county we have the Longview area teams. what we do, we all get together, and if something happens at one of the churches across town, all of us know about it.
That's awesome. He says that they use a county-wide for church security across their county, use that group meet so that they can all keep, that's awesome. When I talk about the sharing information, I really applaud you guys for that, because there's a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of churches aren't that forward thinking. So whoever started that at your county is awesome. That's great. Okay, and a Facebook page. Okay, I'll turn it over to the boss.
Thank you, Scott.
Oh, actually, let me turn it one more time to my email. In case you didn't get the email. And that extra B at the end is bad, so, or the first B. So it's just torchstoneglobal.com.
It's not global?
Not global.
No global. No global. Okay.
Well, if I'm typing it, it might be.
All right. Get your mic swapped out.